everybody. I'm Cheryl Hart. I'm on the board of Corfa, and we're so delighted to have you here today for a groundbreaking event. This is our first hatchery-focused webinar. Just very briefly, for those of you who may not be familiar with the Corfa organization, Corfa is a coalition of refuge friends and advocates, but we also work with Hatchery friends groups. So if you're a member of Friends or a partner group for a hatchery, please join us, because many of the things that we talk about and the training that we try to provide and the other resources that we provide also relate to Hatchery's Friends group. We're delighted again to have this groundbreaking event today, and I'm sure it's going to be very interesting for everybody. I'm going to turn it over now to Karen Holzer from DC Booth. She will tell you about some other exciting upcoming things and then introduce our speakers. Thank you. Oh, sorry, I forgot to do what I just got asked to do. Please put your name and the group that you're with in the chat so that we know who's here, because there wasn't a registration for this, so we'd like to know who's attending, and we'd like to make that connection with you. So name and whatever group you're with. Thank you. Now, Karen.
Hi, I'm Karen Holzer, and I am the Executive Director for the Friends Group for the DC Booth Fish Hatchery, and I'm also a board member for Corfa. So I'm kind of playing a dual role, but to start off, I get to make an announcement, and this is an announcement that affects all hatcheries and fisheries programs across the United States. The message actually comes from April Gregory, the curator of collections and exhibits of the National Fish and Aquatic Conservation Archives. So this is our current museum. It's going to stay the same, but the interior is going to have a major renovation and include exhibits and renovations from the 200,000 archival documents and the 14,000 archives that are stored here at DC Booth for the national program. So we are working with the Fish and Wildlife Service, the DC Booth National Fish Hatchery and Archives, and the Booth Society, which is the Friends Group, on this exhibit design. We have raised over $600,000, the Booth Society, the Friends Group, to support the project, and we're looking for a completion at Thanksgiving time this year and a grand opening next May when we open for the season. So April says the upgrade to the museum will increase the capacity to serve the diverse audience and will include interactive exhibits to further engage visitors. The museum is focused on the history of the National Fish Hatchery system and fish culture, and will feature items from the National Fish and Aquatic Conservation Collection that is housed here on DC Booth. The National Fish Hatchery Museum will shine a light not only on DC Booth, but also a historic and modern national fish hatcheries across the nation. Through the displays, the hope is that there's a deeper understanding of the value of aquatic resources and conservation will be attained. So on behalf of everyone here at DC Booth and the Fish and Wildlife Service, we invite everyone to visit in 2025 and see our new National Fish Hatchery Museum belonging to each of you. And that's my announcement. It's pretty terrific. We're pretty excited about it. It's been in the works for quite a few years. So we're excited for that. If anyone would like to be on our email list for DC Booth, you can let me know, and we will send you updates on how the museum is progressing. And now I have the distinct honor of introducing Nate Wilkie, and he is going to go ahead and introduce himself a little bit more. He is here today to give us a little bit of explanation, little background, and at the end of it, you will all be able to quiz him and ask him any questions that you might have. Nate?
Karen, thank you very much. It is really an honor to be here today. And I actually just learned about the renovation from you about 10 minutes ago. So I'm already booking my plans for May 2025. My first ever meeting with this program was actually at DC booth. So I'm excited to get back, and thanks for filling us in on that. Hello, folks. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Nate Wilkie. I am the branch manager for the National Fish Hatchery System and Applied Science Program. All right. I know for some folks that may not mean a whole lot. So let me just tell you a second, kind of who we are and where we fit. I'm an employee of the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. Within that service, I am in the Fish and Aquatic Conservation Program. Right. I think a lot of folks are familiar with other parts of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, maybe like the National Wildlife Refuge System. We are equivalent to them, but we're on the fishery side. They're more of a land ownership and land agency, land management component of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We're focused more directly on aquatic systems and on the ground aquatic conservation. So we work with the refuge system quite a bit, and some of our other partners in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, programs like Ecological Services, who work closely with the Endangered Species Act, or science applications. There's a number of programs in the Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Fish and Aquatic Conservation Program, which you'll hear me calling FAC, is one of those. Within the Fish and Aquatic Conservation Program sits the National Fish Hatchery System, which is where I spend an awful lot of my time and what I'm going to talk about a little bit today. And before I kind of dive into it, though, I'll just give you a little bit of a feel for what we're hoping to talk about. Make sure I can get my slides advancing. There we go. Today, I'll do a quick introduction about myself. I'll talk a little bit about fish and aquatic conservation and the hatchery system. I'd like to talk about how we work that larger program, the Fish and Aquatic Conservation Program, what we do. I'll introduce you to our national hatchery team and a little bit about how we work with you all and some of the challenges we see right ahead. Again, as I said, my name is Nate Wilkie. I grew up in the Midwest, just outside of Kansas City. I still think of that as home, probably always will, even though I now live in Northern Virginia, about 35 minutes outside of Washington, D.C. I kind of got going in this aquaculture hatchery business about 25 years ago. In the late 90s, I joined the United States Peace Corps and went to sub-Saharan Africa, a country called Zambia. If you haven't been, check it out. It's beautiful. I worked there with their aquaculture development program, and the priority there was food production. We're talking about communities where malnutrition is a major issue. And so I kind of cut my teeth out there in the rural parts of northern Zambia, working hand in hand with local farmers to identify areas to build ponds, get those ponds filled with water and produce ultimately tilapia, right? And the idea was to produce more protein without any sort of real fiscal or financial input. So integrating kind of agriculture and aquaculture. And it was an amazing experience. Certainly got me to see the value of kind of hatcheries and aquaculture, what they have to offer. From there, I came back to the US and spent some time in the academic community, kind of sticking with that aquaculture hatchery background. I realized I really loved being around the water, and this was a way for me to kind of continue that. I worked at the University of Maine and at Memorial University in St. John's, Newfoundland. All my research, that was a lot of research, is really what I was focusing on then. And on the endangered Atlantic salmon. So when people ask me, well, what did you study? I say, well, I tried to make it so that we don't produce couch potato salmon. So whatever salmon we produce in the wild or in captivity, when we release them, are they going to perform well? So I spent a number of years doing that at a couple of different universities, and it really kind of was driven by my interest in conservation, right? And applying some new research and science technology to solve some of those problems. I left St. John's, Newfoundland, and started working with the state of Virginia, where I live now. I was their state director for their hatchery system. That was a system. So I kind of went from the food production component in Africa to that really kind of conservation, endangered species work in Maine and in Newfoundland. And then came to the state of Virginia, where we worked a lot kind of on recreational and sport fishing species, but across the gamut, trout, walleye. We also had a really great mussel program there, straight, no commercial harvest of or recreational harvest of mussels, just really conservation work. So that I enjoyed that. It was a different move going from Canada to Virginia. Did that for a couple years and then was lucky enough to get the job that I have now, which is a little bit different in that it's broader in scope, and it kind of entails all those other parts of the career to date. So that's just a little bit about who I am, kind of how I ended up here today. So I very much appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you. So before I kind of dive into the hatchery system, I want to talk to you just a minute about this larger fish and aquatic conservation program, right, of which we are one part. You'll see that third circle from the left says National Fish Hatchery System. That's kind of where I sit. But I've got some amazing teammates at the headquarters office and across the country who sit in these other branches. One of them is aquatic habitat and species conservation. We've also got our aquatic invasive species program and our aquatic animal drug approval partnership. I'm going to dive into some detail about the work that each one of these components does as we kind of move forward in the presentation, because, you know, we're really good at producing fish and other aquatic animals. It takes hard work, but without the work of, you know, all these branches together, we really cannot achieve conservation outcomes that we want. And these 4 branches are supported by 2 others. Our communications and partnership branch, we know that we are not in conservation alone. And the work from our communications partnership branch really allows us and helps us connect with some of those partners out there and helps us communicate what we do. And of course, we have our budget and information management system, right? None of this happens without kind of the funds behind it. And we have to really make tough decisions about how we allocate those funds. So there's 6 total branches. The 4 you see up here are really ones that are focused directly on resource management. So it gives you an idea of kind of the 4 parts of this program on the national scope. So that's kind of constructed under that fish and aquatic conservation program. We have kind of a series of facilities. We have employees across the country, and we have 5 core programs. Those facilities are, we got the 71 national fish hatcheries and the additional historic National Fish Hatchery where Karen is sitting as we speak, DC Booth National Fish Hatchery. Great place to visit. They have on site there our archives, a really amazing visitor experience. They have an old rail car that you can tour that's back 100 years ago when we were moving fish around the country. They would do that via train. So really an amazing place to visit. I hear in May 2025, it's going to be even better. Also, we have our technology centers and our health centers. They make together. They make our applied science program. We have our aquatic animal drug approval partnership, who, neat thing about them, many neat things, but one cool thing is they are part of the headquarters team, right? And headquarters is based kind of around the DC area, but they sit in Bozeman, Montana, which has a whole different kind of beauty than Washington, DC. And then, of course, there's our 51 across the country fish and wildlife conservation offices. Really the boots on the ground and the waders on the water or in the water of our program, on the ground conservation. I'll talk a bit more about what they do.
Yeah.
We're gonna go to the mall. They know where it is. Yoga Lounge opens at 11.
You guys already got down that? That's crazy.
I'm into that. I'm going to sign me up for that trip. But 51 fish and wildlife conservation offices too, doing an awful lot of work. Again, these all work in concert. That's done through 5. We can kind of exercise. These facilities work together on 5 core programs. National Fish Hatchery System, the maintenance and equipment which supports that. These are big facilities, total real property value about $3.6 billion. They require maintenance on a regular basis. They're life support systems, these hatcheries are. And when things break, there are bad consequences. Habitat assessment and restoration. Without habitat, we are not going to be successful in our conservation mission if there is not habitat available for wild populations. Population assessment and cooperative management, getting in the field, being able to determine what populations are in trouble, what populations are doing well, help us figure out where we should be applying our resources. And of course, cooperative management, really engaging with state partners, tribal partners, industry, nonprofits. We are much more successful when we're working together. And then of course, aquatic invasive species. I think if we've learned anything in the last 4 or 5 years, it's that a small problem in one part of the world can become a very large problem in another part of the world, and it can happen really fast. And our aquatic invasive species program works hard to protect these waterways on which so many communities depend. And that's all accomplished through 1,200 employees spread across the country. It's a lot of people. There are bigger programs than us in the Fish and Wildlife Service, but we get a lot of work done with the facilities and resources that we have. Today, I'm going to kind of drill down a little bit on those ones in lighter blue. That's our national fish hatchery system. It's the fish hatcheries, tech centers, health centers make up that hatchery system. And we have a headquarters leadership team, right, with whom I work with on a regular basis. We've got our coordinator for hatchery operations. That's Taylor Lipscomb. We've got our applied science coordinator, Jennifer Gum. Aquatic animal health and aquaculture is Joel Bader. And then the asset team is two people, Jeff Mast and John Seals. I think we often are excited to talk about the outcome of conservation. Sometimes we talk less about the tools it takes to get there. And that infrastructure in those hatcheries requires that asset management portfolio. Make sure that the facilities we have are working. So hatchery system's been around a while. 152 years, right? It was the Fish and Wildlife Service before the Fish and Wildlife Service existed. And what happened is communities were recognizing decline of fisheries, a lot of them in the Northeast US and the Mid-Atlantic. I'm also in the Pacific Northwest. Fish populations that people had become reliant upon were suddenly not as present as they once were. And so in 1871, the United States Commission of Fish and Fisheries was formed to figure out, what is the problem, what's happening here. And shortly thereafter, that was when Ulysses S. Grant, who was the president at that time, appointed a person named Spencer Baird and said, how can you fix this problem? Spencer said, I got an idea. We're going to create these fish hatcheries. And that's when the National Fish Hatchery System was established. I do believe that from that time until today, this system has really operated with good intentions aimed at making sure that resources are available for people to enjoy of all different walks of life. Today, the fish hatchery system has kind of 4 major priorities that we focus on. They've changed a little bit from 152 years ago, but we still raise fish and other aquatic animals. We do reptiles, amphibians, we have birds on site, we got mammals on site. So a lot of work. It's really grown. But one priority we have is recovery. Well, you'll hear us say the word recovery a lot. That's focusing specifically on endangered or threatened species. Right, so this is usually late in the game. There's been a population that's crashed. We're asked, with our hatchery system and our what I'll call captive rearing facilities or captive propagation facilities, can we help recover these populations? So we're a big part of many recovery plans, which are dependent on partner work, states, tribes, federal partners. We play an important role in propagating animals that are endangered. Another thing we do is restoration of imperiled populations. So if we're successful here, then we're able to prevent listing, which to me, as I've always thought of as kind of an ideal scenario. With listing, comes a lot of regulatory change. A lot of resources are invested. If we can prevent that listing by helping recover or restore a population before it gets to that point, then I think we're being really successful. We actually had something I'm excited to talk about is just recently, lake sturgeon. We're going through the process of potentially being listed. Lake sturgeon have great cultural value in the Great Lakes all the way down to the Southeast. They reside in 14 different states, and they were going to be potentially listed. But because of the work of aquatic biologists, ecologists, state, tribal, federal, across that landscape. And the hatchery system was a big part of this. We were able to avoid that listing status. And so that to me is a real success story of a restoration program. We also, there's a picture of an Apache trout here, work very close with tribal partners on some of our trust responsibilities through co-stewardship. That's that Apache trout, like I mentioned. I'm going to dive into that story a little bit later in more depth. But really cool story and great example of partners and conservation toolboxes. So we spent an awful lot of time working with tribal partners to help co-steward some of these aquatic resources. And finally, mitigation. What does that really mean? Mitigation for ecosystem impacts caused by federal infrastructure. Basically, over time, and as a means to kind of acquire hydropower, we've constructed dams. And when you build a dam on a river, it has a significant impact on that aquatic system. So we work with those agencies that have built those dams to help restore those fisheries that have been impacted. So we mitigate for the impacts of those dams. Some of those partners include entities like U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Tennessee Valley Authority, Bonneville Power Administration. So we do a lot of work to kind of maintain fisheries that have been impacted by federal projects. And that's kind of a little bit of a taste of kind of what, the National Fish Hatchery System does. But like I said, the fisheries program is more than just hatcheries alone, right? We do a great deal of work outside of that, all centered around kind of the vision of the Fish and Wildlife Service, which is a future where people and nature are connected in a way where every community feels a part of and committed to the natural resources around us. And that takes a lot more than just hatchery work to do that. We have kind of 6 major components that we rely on to make the Fish and Aquatic Conservation Program have success. Starts with connecting people and nature. It's one of the reasons I'm really excited to be here today. We are powered by our volunteers and friends groups. In the last year, 78,000 volunteer hours contributed to conservation. 1,600 volunteers at hatcheries and fisheries office across the country. The value of those contributions, if we start adding dollar values to it, $2.6 million. And that's from 18 friends groups. So I often like to imagine, what will it look like as this kind of grows in the future? Also through those friends groups, and I think one of the neat components of the hatchery system is that we're in a lot of local communities and we've been there for a long time. These are some old facilities. So we have opportunities to really connect people and nature, right? So for example, last year, 1 million visitors to hatcheries and other fisheries offices, almost 28,000 youth engaged in environmental education programs. And when I was a kid, I remember going to a state hatchery in southern Missouri and seeing the trout there. And it really changed my perspective of conservation and how you can manage wild populations really effectively, different creative ways to do so. Also 188,000 participants in recreation and education programs. We host a lot of events around the country to engage these local communities, where in many cases we've been there for 5 or 6 generations. And like I said, this is really reliant on the friends groups that we have. And we right now have 18. They're all listed there. I have not been to all of them, not met them all. But I will say that when I was first in Maine in about 2002, 2003, I was working at Craig Brook National Fish Hatchery. And I was just so struck by the role. I didn't know a lot about fish hatchery or the National Fish Hatchery Program at that time, or friends groups. I was so struck by the importance of the friends group and how involved they were every day. When I would go there to do research, I'd be engaging with members of the friends group. I gave a talk after hours at it's kind of a conference that they set up, hosting community events. I didn't know that was a part of all this. And so it's really neat to see how much this has grown. And to now be a part of it today. And I often think about those days at Craig Brook National Fish Hatchery and that friends group and how excited they got me about. They made me feel like I was part of a community. We also restore habitat, right? So we can produce a bunch of fish, but if there's nowhere to put them, then it's really not worth that work. And we do excellent habitat restoration. In the last year, 25,000 acres restored to benefit aquatic species, 2,200 stream miles reopened, and 118 barriers to fish migration removed. If you look at those pictures on the right, that top one is a culvert. We've all seen them around. That culvert presents real challenges to aquatic populations. Fish can't get up into that to move past it. So you've taken a habitat and cut it into different pieces. So you can remove those culverts and replace them with something like the dam or the bridge shown below. And now we've opened up whole new areas of habitat. We're really proud of that work. That takes a ton of cooperation across multiple federal agencies, industries, and we are right now actively, the Fish Passage Program is engaged at a very broad scale, and we're really making significant change on the landscape. So I'm excited to talk about that. As I mentioned, we propagate and stock aquatic species, also non-aquatic species, but some numbers for you. And I like to share these with our friends at zoos and aquariums because it kind of blows their mind. 126 million fish and aquatic species released by national fish hatcheries last year. 118 million sport fish released for recreational fisheries. I pause here for a second. I think sometimes when I say sport fish, people think I mean non-native fish, and I don't. A lot of the fish that anglers engage or that lead to recreation are native species that can be in trouble. And so we work a lot to support those kind of recreational fisheries, native fish included, right? 49 million eggs transferred. So we work with state and tribal partners to make sure they have access to healthy eggs for fish. That means that we've been tested to make sure they don't have diseases. So when we're moving them around, we're not moving diseases in places we don't want them. And 20 million federally listed species released or transferred to another hatchery. So a lot of great endangered species work. Here I've added 2 more components. It says use applied science and cutting edge technology, and then assessing and monitoring. This is really diving into the science program that we've got, the applied science program, which kind of cuts across our facilities, right? So, and we're actively engaged in this. We have great scientific teams. We don't really make decisions without thinking about it through that lens, because we know that if we don't use that lens, we can put things at risk. So in the last year, we had 129 peer-reviewed publications just by the fisheries program, 32 of those directly related to captive propagation. That's research that's valuable not just to us, but to other partners, including even industry. The aquaculture industry can do, use a lot of the work we do on feeds. We're often challenged to rear animals that have never been reared before. So we had to come up with new food, new technology. And once we do that, we need to really know how that works in the wild. And that's where those population assessment and that monitoring that's conducted by all those staff members working in our fish and wildlife conservation offices. Last year, 304 populations they assessed. That's a staggering number. We cannot be successful unless we work together. And like I said, this applied science program cuts across our whole program. I've mentioned the fish health centers, the fish technology centers, and our fish and wildlife conservation offices. But that aquatic animal drug approval partnership, one of our best partner engaging programs, I think one of the best in the country outside of just the fisheries program. They work really closely with industry, state, and tribal partners to help them test and develop new treatments for animals that are in captivity. When you rear animals, there's really nothing worse than watching them and be in poor health or experience poor welfare. And anyone I know that's run one of these facilities takes great pride in the welfare of the animals on site. And that aquatic animal drug approval program really allows us to work with the Food and Drug Administration to kind of test new drugs to make sure that we're behaving responsibly when we have these animals in captivity. There's also the aquatic invasive species program, which I mentioned a little while ago. Again, just another example where we have all these different pieces of the puzzle, and if one of them isn't effective, it really hurts all of the other ones. So this program really aims at combating aquatic invasive species through the Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force, which is a bunch of partners from different sectors working together to identify and manage nuisance species. We also prevent invasions through determining, which species that are already outside of the U.S., that are outside of the U.S. right now, might prevent a big threat. Which ones do we think if they got here would spread? And then we make sure those don't come in. And a new initiative, well, not new, but one that's really growing, is our early detection and rapid response network, which is a way to kind of prioritize and respond to invasions quickly. And we're now working with a number of federal partners to apply the latest technology to detect these animals before they become a problem through things like environmental DNA. And all these tools are really important, right? I think one of the challenges we have, I look at invasive species, and you've probably all seen videos of the carp jumping out of the water, and we tend to focus in conservation, I think, an awful lot on need. Where's the challenge? What gaps are there? We do a lot of talking about problems, right? And that's the business. But every once in a while, I think it's important to take a step back and talk about success stories. And I think we have a number we can choose from. I mentioned the lake sturgeon one just a few minutes ago, but one that I think really represents the spirit, kind of the fish and aquatic conservation program and the partners in our aquatic conservation community is the Apache trout. That's a trout that's native to Arizona and the White Mountains there. Beautiful fish. Holds great cultural value to the White Mountain Apache tribe. In addition to that, it's a globally popular fish for angling, right? The White Mountain Apache tribe has really led the co-stewardship and conservation of this species for a long, long time. And in the late 1950s into the 60s, they started to see some population challenges. Population was crashing, and ultimately ended up getting listed as endangered. And the tribe led an effort reaching out to partners to really figure out how can we tackle this challenge. And every component of our program, I know, and partners at the Forest Service partners at Arizona Fish and Game, partners at Trout Unlimited. We all brought our tools to bear. And so this is an example where this species was being challenged by habitat quality was deteriorating. Non-native species were competing for resources or even mixing genes by breeding with them, which can have really negative consequences. So all the tools came to play. You know, we had a fish passage program, improving habitat and restoring habitat. We had our invasive species program and our applied science program, figuring out ways to find and remove non-native species. The propagation, Apache trout are really difficult to propagate, and shortly after this effort led by the tribe really began, they had some success, and the species was downlisted to threatened, which, hey, that's great. That also means harvest can happen. So worked closely with hatchery systems to kind of develop means to propagate fish so they could, you know, maintain a harvest while also maintaining a healthy population. They are tricky fish to raise, and it took a lot of really advanced work to figure out how to do it, including actually cryopreservation of sperm from native wild populations that we can then bring into hatchery systems so that we can really prevent consequences associated with inbreeding. Really amazing work. And then ongoing active monitoring on the landscape by folks and partners and the folks on the ground, like the people in our Fish and Wildlife Conservation offices and their partners at Forest Service and Arizona Fish and Game. So I'm excited to say that right now, we have actually, this is under proposal to be delisted. All right, it's under review right now. We don't know the results. We'll know that hopefully later this summer. If that recommendation is followed and that delisting approved, it will be the first sport fish for that ever to happen. So I just wanted to take a moment to tell you a little bit about that story. There's much better, more detailed summaries of that than I could ever offer. But an amazing project of co-stewardship, really representing the value of all these different tools in the toolbox, right? Including not just hatcheries, but many of those advanced science techniques, and then the real leadership of and co-stewardship from our tribal partners. So I encourage you to kind of Google that, look into it, see some great stories. Maybe if Holly's so inclined, I believe she's on the call, maybe she'll drop a couple of links in the chat for some really cool articles on that. That being said, I do love to celebrate success. You can kind of ask anyone that knows me. It's something that I do enjoy doing, but I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that there are still some challenges ahead. And in the conservation community, as I'm sure many of you and your friends groups are the same way, we hear the word challenges, we focus on the word opportunities. And in the hatchery system, we see some real opportunities for growth in the coming years. Three main areas: facility modernization, adapting to climate change. We're seeing major shifts in water quality and habitat degradation, and then shifting conservation priorities. Today is not 152 years ago. So we've got to maybe get some new voices around the table to help us figure out how to prioritize our work. Facility modernization. This is where we are across the country. You can see that landscape, right? We cover a broad area, which is great. Like I said, this leads to great community connection. I'm really proud of those connections. And I enjoy a few things more than visiting hatcheries and getting to know people around the community, the staff at the hatchery, and how they're a part of the community around them. At the same time, while you have that legacy, that 150 years and those generations in communities, our facilities are pretty old, right? 16 of them over 100 years old. The bulk of them are, 50 to 100. Our newer ones are 20 or 25 years old. With that comes challenges associated with our infrastructure, right? We're having deteriorating facilities. So we work really hard to kind of allocate the resources we've got for maintenance and construction to the highest priority. And what we focus on is keeping animals alive and healthy. But this is one that I lose sleep over sometimes, only because I'm concerned that if we have a catastrophic infrastructure failure at one of these facilities, that puts people at risk, and it can put our populations at risk. And in this business, losing populations when you're responsible for their welfare is not just heartbreaking. It's not just a failure to conservation. It's heartbreaking and a difficult emotional challenges. So that is something, a challenge and an opportunity. What we're trying to figure out is, with these resources we've got, how do we take those facilities that are maybe 100 years old, and when we're fixing them, do we change what we're doing to adapt to new priorities? Do we have to rebuild it the way it was, or can we be more efficient? And that's right in line with this kind of climate priority that we're seeing from the Fish and Wildlife Service right now. This is kind of just the 7 pillars of the climate change action program in the Fish and Wildlife Service. I'm not going to dive into a bunch of detail on each one, But the Fish and Aquatic Conservation Program and the hatchery system exists in each one of these, right? And one program that we're tackling right now in the hatchery system related to this is trying to assess our facilities for where the most vulnerable might be. And the Pacific Northwest is leading the charge here. They've really done these climate change vulnerability assessments at their hatcheries, seeing which ones are most sensitive to changing water supplies around them, which are most exposed. Do you have a station that maybe is right near some rising water levels? What's the impact? If we lose production capacity at that facility, what does that mean for our partners that might rely on that work? And finally, do we have an ability to adapt, right, if necessary? And this kind of ties in with our modernization effort, right? Can we look at some of our facilities, figure out which are most vulnerable, and then maybe adapt the construction and the rehabilitation of those facilities to meet some of these changes we know are coming. And finally, I think we like to say that we've had 152 years with a lot of success, but we got to keep looking at the future. And I think that's where we have to really address changing priorities. And so, in talking about that, why do we care? Biodiversity is a big thing. That's something that's valuable to me. Ecosystem function. It's another thing valuable to me. I enjoy the recreation component. A lot of folks do, whether it's paddling, fishing, swimming, food security. Many communities in the U.S. are on rivers, lakes, and oceans, and they depend on healthy systems. The Great Lakes host an $8 billion fishery, right? So those are a lot of state and tribal, federal, all sorts of communities that rely on those resources. And if those resources collapse, those communities will have strife that I don't like to think about. Economics tied directly to that. People depend on aquatics for a lot of economic resources. Cultural value. All across the country, there are different cultures tied to the water, right? And that's imperative. And I think one of the areas we're really trying to focus right now is both culture and community resilience, by making sure all the voices in the community are represented when we start talking about what our priorities are. We've really kind of embraced co-stewardship with some of our tribal partners to get a better understanding of the change that's occurred with these populations over time and successes that our tribal partners have had, and how can we incorporate that? What can we do to kind of help success that they've already had? So we're working hard to make sure that that diverse group of people is around a table when we start setting our priorities. Those are the challenges and the opportunities we see ahead. And we know that working with our friends groups and with folks in Corfa helps us get closer to those. And I closed by just a little reminder about the vision that we have in mind here, right? And that's this connection to nature so that everyone feels like they're a part of it and committed to the world around us. I spend a lot of time on the water, not as much as I'd like. I spend a lot of time at youth sports too, but a lot of time on the water with my wife and my daughters. And I've made a promise to myself and to them that they will have the same opportunities that I've had growing up to have that experience. So this vision is not just a bunch of words to me or to my colleagues. This is something that we live every day. And I know a lot of people on the call share this vision. I want to say thank you to all the friends groups out there, to all the staff that have done so much work to help us have some of the successes we've had. And I look forward to some of the big challenges and opportunities ahead. With that, I'd be happy to take any sort of questions or comments you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Nate. What a lot of information. Thanks.
And if you want, Nate, you can stop sharing your screen. And if people have questions, please raise your hand, which if you go to the bottom of the screen, there is a place under more, I believe, or you should see reaction. And you can raise your hand.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have not looked at the chat at all either. Oh, thank you, Holly, for putting some links in there.
Sounds like you covered it all, Nate. Nobody is asking questions. Maybe you gave them so much they're still thinking about all of it. Karen, I saw your hand.
Of course. So Nate, what do you have for suggestions or how that we might perhaps build more communication and involve our friends groups and encourage more development of new friends groups?
I've got some thoughts. There is someone on the call who might have more thoughts. I would love to get her feedback. I'm speaking slowly, waiting to see if her microphone comes off mute. I'm happy to answer. But Holly, do you have any thoughts on that? So what we're doing right now is working closely with our colleagues at the National Wildlife Refuge System, right? They have a really well-developed kind of infrastructure for engaging with friends groups. We do not have quite the staff or size and capacity that the NWRS has. So we're planning to really kind of piggyback on the efforts that they've got and start trying to kind of build those community connections. And Holly is really leading the charge on that. I think a lot of it comes from, I always encourage staff at our stations to engage with their communities around them, right? And build those relationships. Well, and it doesn't have to be about fish. It can be about, the local soccer team, or it can be about, where's the best place to get a cup of coffee. I really think that's a starting point. So I think anytime, you have an opportunity to go visit a station, go for it. If you have an opportunity to talk about the program, if you think the program's doing good work, share that with the folks in your community. And I'm a firm believer in grassroots development. That was something really drilled into me at the Peace Corps. So I think that's where it can really start.
And I think that it's safe to say that the Corfa organization is very interested in helping bridge some of those communication. So please keep us in mind and keep the board in mind as you move forward.
Absolutely. Right, go ahead, Holly.
I was just going to say Holly was having a problem getting her mic on, but it looks like she's got it on now. So
anything to add, Holly? No pressure. She may still be struggling. Yeah, I mean it when I say that. I showed you the hours, right, from friends groups. It's a huge value. It's a huge asset to our success. And I do think that the hatchery system offers a pretty unique angle in that we have facilities that have been places for generations. And when I go to communities, like I was recently in South Carolina, and I was given a recommendation for a barbecue place, and from one of the members of the staff at the hatchery, I swung by and I told them, hey, and they all knew everyone at the hatchery. And so they were like, oh yeah, we were over there. So I know they're ingrained. So I think the opportunity is really there. And we will absolutely stay in touch with y'all.
Hey, Nate, this is Alan. I don't know how to raise
Alan.
my hand. Can I jump in? How you doing? Yeah, I can find my mute button, but I don't know how to raise my hand. But anyway, obviously, Nate. So I'm Alan Brown. I'm the assistant regional director for the FACT program in the Southeast. And so, one of my first loves is fisheries and hatcheries. And friends groups. Obviously, we have quite a number of them in the Southeast region. And, looking at the overall number, I forget what it was, 16 out of 70 or something. And obviously that's something that we need to grow. But I guess my question is, and I know we've tried a couple times, what do you see the value of having kind of a national friends group? I mean, we've tried that initiative a couple of times. And is that something that we would see of value? Because obviously the refuge system is very successful with their national effort. I'm just wondering if that's something that we need to try again, or what's your feeling on that?
Are you asking me or are you asking Corfa?
I'm asking you.
I don't.
But they can certainly jump in.
I think there's value in it. I think the challenge that we've got is determining kind of where to pull those resources from to run the effort. And so that's something that I know that Holly and I talk about a fair bit at the national level. So I think what we'd want to know is kind of meet with our national leadership and see kind of where does this fall on the priority scale? And, are we ready to kind of take that effort on? Because when I came on board, I think there was one that was kind of in existence, but then it was gone shortly thereafter.
Kinda.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I wish there was a way to be more coordinated and streamline that communication. But yeah, I think it comes down to a question, as you know, Alan, we talk about priorities all the time, but it kind of comes down to that. I would see real value in it because I think that as we look to the future, we're going to really rely on communities to help us identify local challenges and make sure we're tackling the right priorities.
Karen,
Joan?
can I chime in? So I'm Joan Patterson with the Coalition of Refuge Friends and Advocates, and had previously worked for the National Wildlife Refuge Association and probably been involved with Friends for, I don't know, maybe about 30 years. But in terms of a national organization, just so you guys all know, that one of the things that the coalition is trying to do is both with Refuge and Hatchery Friends groups, bring everyone together into the Friends community so that we all can grow, we all can enhance what we're doing, you know, and it's things like talking about what we as nonprofits need to be doing, our governance, what we can be doing in terms of speaking up for our refuges and for the hatcheries. Some of the things that are a little bit different with refuges is there is the National Wildlife Refuge Association, which really leads the advocacy effort. And that was started by Fish and Wildlife Service retirees, refuge system retirees. I know the hatchery system has tried to have a national group before, but one of the, and hopefully something will finally gel. One of the things that we're trying to do is, like I say, just bring the friends together so that every friends group can be strengthened. Everyone feels like they're part of a community, that they're not alone. We do talk about advocacy, you know, and next month's webinar, we do monthly webinars, will be about how do you develop relationships with your members of Congress. One of the things the refuge system does is that we annually have a chat with the Chief of Refuges, with Cynthia Martinez. And boy, we get a lot of information with regards to what's going on with the budget, so that, you know, we all can understand that there's insufficient funding. And if there's insufficient funding for the refuge system, oh, I am so sure, even though I don't know the hatchery system very well, there's bound to be a lot of insufficient funding. So Nate, I thank you for doing this webinar because it starts to build that relationship that the friends need with your administration to understand what is going on nationally so that they can speak up. So thanks.
And I was going to pipe in. I think Linda Schnee was on earlier. I don't know whether she's still on or not, but for the Friends Groups representatives, hi, Linda. I was just going to mention that there are some resources that Linda's in charge of that also benefit Hatchery's Friends Groups, and those include mentoring and the various trainings that Fish and Wildlife does for Friends Groups. They've done, could you please mute yourselves if you're not talking? There is also the National Friends Workshop was held this year. There is a Friends Academy. And then, as I mentioned, the mentoring. And Linda, do you want to talk a little bit about those so the folks will know?
Sure, I'm happy to. And then if Holly wants to jump in there, it sounded like she got her mic to work. Yeah, hi, everybody. I'm Linda Schnee. I'm the national lead for friends and volunteers across the whole agency, not just the refuge system. My position sits in the visitor services division, which is in the National Wildlife Refuge System at headquarters, but we do serve the whole agency. I've been here about 4 years, and I think I've been trying certainly to bridge the gap a little bit more, working with Holly, working with Joan and Cheryl, you know, just trying to make sure that hatcheries are a part of the discussion and friends groups that support hatcheries. And as Cheryl mentioned, you know, any trainings that we do for friends programs, those are absolutely open to hatchery friends groups. So we did have a good presence at the large National Friends Workshop, which is about 250 friends, members, and service staff that come together. That was about a year ago, actually, a year and a month ago. And then the mentor program, as Cheryl mentioned, is definitely open to everyone, any friends group and the site that they support that wants to have a little extra attention and time if they're struggling with some issues around, you know, revitalizing a board or something like that. The Friends Academy program, that will happen, that's scheduled for next summer at NCTC, and that's usually about 24 participants who have to submit an application. to be a part of that academy. And it's like about a week, 4.5 days or so at NCTC. And it's really sort of a friends, I don't want to say 101, and it's not really a 201 either, but it's a real deep dive into what it means to be a friend, what friends groups do and don't do, and resources and all that sort of thing. And of course, those are absolutely open to Hatchery friends, not just Refuge system friends. And then with the friends workshop, we really are going to look, that's scheduled for 2026, but it really is budget dependent. We'll have to see, because that's a pretty big lift. But the hope is that we would do it again in 2026, and we will definitely try to pull in more resources and presentations that are specific to groups that are supporting the hatchery system. So, or hatcheries in particular. Like we had a budget talk, and that was a budget talk very specific to the refuge system. We will try to do a budget talk that's specific to hatcheries, that sort of thing. So just working really closely as much as I can with Holly and with Corfa to make sure that hatchery friends are included. So Holly, if you are able to jump in, go for it.
I think I am. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Perfect. And honestly, Linda, I think you nailed it. Like, I think that was the answer, right? We're not gonna within, we've got a lot of resources for the fisheries program and the hatchery system, but we are nowhere near the size and scale of we're part of a big agency, right? And we don't want to recreate the wheel. And you guys have been incredibly great over the last couple of years that I've been working here, building that relationship and building those connections between the resources that you guys have built out to support friends and volunteer programs, and working with us at headquarters and in the regions to try to make sure, the biggest thing is an information gap, making sure our people in the field know who to go to get that support from their regional coordinators, and just working to fill those gaps and make sure that our people know that they're included, that they know who to call, that they know where to get the help, and that we're stepping that help down to them and down to their friends and volunteers as well. And so just that better coordination on our part is, I hope, gonna get us in the direction of building these programs much better.
A lot of feedback for Alan's question there. Good question, Alan.
It's something for us to mention too with the coalition. Please be aware that there are ways, if you're a member of a friends group, to connect with other friends. So there is a Facebook group for Friends, Coalition of Refuge Friends and Advocates, and I wish we had fish in the title too. There is also a website, and on that website, the recording of this webinar will be there eventually. But it lists all of the webinars that were done over the past, 3-4 years at this point. A lot of resources on governance. So if you're a friends group and you need a policy on conflict of interest, you don't have to write it from scratch. There's copies of those policies on our website. Customize it for yourself, but you don't have to start from the foundation. That stuff is there for you. We do the monthly webinars. We have the website. We have a Facebook group, and we've started just recently what we call Friend Share. And it's just a once a month, people getting together on a Zoom call. We have specific topics. The next one is next week. It's Nature Store fundraising. And then just a breakout room that's open discussion. So friends can talk about whatever they want to talk about. The good, the bad, the ugly, whatever it is. But it's really just meant for friends organizations and the staff of friends organizations. They're not recorded. It's just good conversation. So there are a combination of with Fish and Wildlife Service and others. We're just trying to provide, like I say, as many resources as possible so that no friends organization feels alone. And that we're not overburdening the regional friends coordinators with a lot of nonprofit stuff, okay? Because we're all running nonprofits here. So there's a lot of information we can share with the other nonprofits. So that's it from, if you've got any other questions for Nate, Holly, Linda, Corfa, please go ahead and share them.
You mentioned Cynthia, and I was able to see some of the slides that she presented to you all. I would be more than happy to. So Cynthia is the assistant director of the National Wildlife Refuge System. I'd be more than happy to talk to our new Assistant Director of the Fish and Aquatic Conservation Program with a similar presentation in mind. His name is Dave Myko. We were without an assistant director and a number of acting assistant directors for about a year and a half there. So, just didn't have that kind of overall voice. We now have it. If you're interested, I'd be more than happy to talk to Dave Myko about a similar presentation.
Absolutely.
Alan, I'm going to ping you to help me have that conversation.
Will do, Nate.
All right.
Okay. Any additional questions, comments?
Thank you, Nate. This has been wonderful, and Holly for all of her work, and for the Corfa board for encouraging and moving forward with a webinar that's kind of centered on hatcheries.
Well, thank you for the invitation and the opportunity. We just kind of want to give a background as to who we are. We're kind of a small program at times. We have a large impact, given that size, mainly because of our close connection to partners. Just wanted to give you all a feel for what the Fish and Aquatic Conservation Program is and kind of where the hatchery system fits into that mix. We're extremely proud of the work that we do. And, the position that I'm in, I stand on the shoulders of many, many people, 150 years of work. So it's great to have a chance to get out and talk about it.
Hey, and I would just like to give a special shout out to Karen. Karen is Executive Director at DC Booth. She was so instrumental in moving this forward and has been a champion for hatcheries. At every gathering of friends, she doesn't let us forget about hatcheries and has done so much to educate the rest of the Friends community. And she will be stepping down as Executive Director at the Friends of DC Booth the end of next month. And we will surely miss her there, but hope that she will continue on with the coalition. So, thanks, Karen.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Joan.
All right, if there is nothing else, then I wish you all a good day. And thank you so much for attending.
Thank you, folks. Have a great day,
Thank
everybody.
you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Nate. Thanks, Holly.